Hi everybody. How you doing?
Good.
Good.
Good. Nice to see you. Thanks for being a little bit early. That's great. We'll get started in just about 2 minutes. If you have any questions you want to ask at the outset too, just let me know. Alrighty. Here come our people. Alrighty, let's get started. Welcome to week 2 in planning your novel. I want to start by checking in and seeing how it's been going. Tell me about your last week. Tell me about the first 3 beats. Tell me where you're frustrated and where you're succeeding. Who wants to ask a question or share anything? Diane?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I to be really honest with you, I find the beat thing a little bit unsatisfactory. And I think that some of it is coming from the fact, some of it may be coming from the fact that about a year ago, I took a course where we analyzed crime novels, which is pretty straightforward genre, in accordance with this kind of structure. He had the writer that did the course had done the same thing. He took this approach and modified it to novels. And it was extremely disappointing, especially as we got into more literary ones such as John le Carre's novels, because everybody had a different opinion of each of these things and nobody could really agree. And even a guy that was teaching the course finally said, well, clearly this doesn't work for us. So I have that background and I've been trying to keep that front and center, so I'm not letting it, shade my opinion now.
Sure.
But I still feel that it's a little bit to just take this and start here on this beat sheet, I was kind of stymied. And what I finally did was I just started writing, and I have like 7,000 words now. And it was after that point yesterday when I got to 7,000 words that I went back to this sheet because I didn't want to come to class empty-handed. And then I was I was able to do probably a little bit better job with the blurb. And I was able to get to the opening image.
Mhm.
But I sort of got into setup. But that number 2, that theme stated, I know what my themes are
Mhm.
to some degree, but this single scene where someone other than your protagonist makes a statement that hints at what the protagonist will learn before the story ends really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And last night I went back through a couple of novels that I know well and tried to make it work from that point of view, or try to answer that one from the point of view of those. And I really didn't get very far. So I think I guess in sum, I have mixed feelings about this approach. I do appreciate all your talk last week about number of words per day that you would have to do to achieve a novel, and that actually served to motivate me. And, I think I'm capable of 1,000 words a day without too much difficulty. So all of that was very helpful. And of course, the more I wrote, the more I started to get ideas where I could go back to the speech sheet.
Sure.
but that one has me stymied. I don't
Okay.
see
So
how
let
I take a single scene before really starting that would do this and what it even really means.
Okay, so let's address all the things that you mentioned, Diane. And thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. So as we talked about last week, in the lecture and the slides, which you guys have, I went through several different structures for planning novels. So you can use one of them if you don't like the beat sheet. And the truth is, you don't have to plan your novel, but you guys are in a class called Planning Your Novel. So the chances are good that you want to plan a novel, otherwise you wouldn't have signed up for it. I say all this because I want to emphasize that there is no one right way to go about writing a novel. It works differently for different people. And ultimately, you have to figure out what works for you. But what I do find, and I'm teaching this from my experience, um, I I didn't want to sit down and plan it the first time I wrote a novel, and I faced many more challenges with, I guess, holes in the story or disconnects from start to finish because I didn't have a clear line of thought in my head. And a novel is a big undertaking as opposed to a short story or an essay where you can see very quickly where you start, where you end, what transformation there is, and that kind of thing. So a longer work benefits, I think, from some planning, however that works for you. You're welcome to write it and then do the beat sheet, although I don't know that the beat sheet would be useful at that point. But in my experience, the work of trying to plan out a novel, it's not easy, but it pays off in the long run. It makes the writing easier, and it leads you to need fewer significant revisions um, because you've thought it through. But the challenge, you guys, is in thinking it through. And so saying, I mean, it's hard. This is not easy work. So if you got through 3 beats last week, like amazing, that's great. But the truth is that I spend a full month working on one of these when I'm planning a novel. And I write 5 hours, 5 days a week, 3 hours a day. And I devote all of that time for a month to working on a beat sheet. So that, and I also do character sketches, I do other things in that month, but all I do is plan so that when I start to write, I have that structure. It usually changes when I'm writing, but not as significantly as when I don't have it thought through. So, as for beat number 2, the theme, and there could be several themes, but you're going to want to choose one overarching theme that is going to be the thread through your through line through the book, so that you can keep coming back to things and repeating that theme so that the reader is very clear on, what issue are we tackling? What idea are we trying to get across? And so that's highly specific to say another character says something. You don't have to do it that way. But I do think it's important to think of, well, what is the one sentence takeaway, the thread that goes through this novel that I can always attach to when I'm writing scenes or I'm, doing some internal dialogue, and I can check in and say, does this reflect the theme? Or does it not? And then maybe it doesn't belong here. It's sort of, it's if you imagine a thread going through the whole thing and every chapter attaches to that thread, that's really what you want to think of in beat number 2, is what is going to run through for consistency to tie it all together, all the characters, all the scenes, all the everything. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Mhm.
Does that clarify? Yeah, for that?
Yeah, yeah. I like that. I mean, that's clearer to me than coming up right now with a single scene where someone other than my protagonist.
Yeah.
Um, but still, do you have an example of that from literature somewhere? Well known, reasonably well known literature?
Yeah, I do. Um, and I'm gonna have to figure out where I have it to give to you. Hold on a sec. I know where I can find it. Hold on a quick minute. All right, just give me a sec. I'm almost there. Let's see. That's not it. Yeah, I'm not getting my hands on it right now, but I will find it when you guys are writing, so I will have it today. Okay?
Yep,
So we
great.
will go over it. Yeah. Okay, so I see other questions in here. Sheila, you're having trouble with sequencing. Does your book correspond loosely with the beat sheet? Yeah, it should. That's the idea. Is that it may not be chapter one is beat one, or you might have multiple chapters within a beat, but I tend to write in order, and then I may move things or I may change things as it evolves, but yes, it corresponds to that. Do you want to clarify a little bit more about the sequencing, Sheila? Make sure I answer that.
I guess, excuse me, when it seemed to me that in number 3 is where your book really starts.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was doing number 3, I was like, okay, where am I supposed to, really start, or how to
It
get
really
these
starts at
together?
number one. It really starts at number one. Not the synopsis, but the opening image.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it could be an inciting incident. It could be like something happens and it draws the reader in and we're in the story. So the story, if you think about a novel, the story starts, it's not the story of someone's whole life. It's a period in their life. And so what is the kickoff that launches this story? And then you're like, oh my, I need to catch up. I need to see what's going on with these people and how they got here. But the inciting incident, the opening image, that's where you want to start.
Okay.
Did you have a question about that? Because you thought it was number 3?
No, I think I just need to move some stuff around.
Okay. Okay. Cool. That's awesome. And the thing is, when you guys do this, what you're going to find, maybe this week, maybe next week, is that there are some holes in your story. Like you have a great idea and you have a sense of your characters. But, a book is a long piece of storytelling. And it's understandable that you might not have everything thought through. And, I'll even say, like, I think I mentioned to you guys last week, I'm writing my third novel. I wrote 70,000 words. I threw it out. I'm starting over because it wasn't going the way I thought I wanted it to go. And I had my beat sheet done. I thought I was really clear and I was talking it through with a mentor and she challenged me and said, I don't know that you have enough stakes for the protagonist. Like what's at stake here? And, I wanted to say, oh, forget it. I know I've already done my beat sheet, but actually she was right. And so sometimes we have to get out of our own way to look at, did I think it through? Do I have just too happy-go-lucky of a story here and there need to be stakes? Like what's at stake? Why should readers care? So sometimes you work on a beat sheet and then you work it through with someone and then you have to make some changes too because you may not have the story as thought out as you think you do. And I don't know, it's easy to say that like a tool doesn't work for us and it might not. I mean not everybody uses a beat sheet. I didn't used to. Um, but I have come to feel for myself at least that when I don't like a tool or somebody's advice to me, it's more me than them. And I have to look at what am I doing? Like and I tend to be, I'm impatient. I tend to want a shortcut. Like I don't want to, I don't want to take months to write a book. Well, it takes months to write a book. So why am I expecting anything different? And so I have to get out of my own way because yes, I need to slow down and do the planning so that it can be um it can be fruitful and a good experience too. Martina, you were talking about structure from Bridgerton and the wedding date, the books. Did you want to talk about that?
Oh yeah, just I can remember who someone asked if there are examples for the structure. In both books, I liked it, and we even studied it in a class once. In my experience as a reader, when I find a book boring after the first third, it's pretty much because they don't have a structure.
Yeah.
And then it's information, but there's no arc, there's mistakes, and it just
Yeah.
kind of fizzles out.
Sure. So
And
let's
just
use,
like you, I'm
Go
not with a beat sheet yet because I approach it in a different way. I have to have my characters figured out first.
sure.
I did this week and started on the beat sheet, but
Okay.
when I write screenplays, it's the same. If I do it without the beat sheet and outline, it takes me a lot longer to revise and rewrite than when I'm smart enough to spend the time on my outline.
Yes.
I usually take more time for the outline than for the actual writing.
Sure. Yep. I agree. Yep. That makes sense. Um, okay, let's see what else. Susan, what example did you want to share?
Oh, it's very, very basic and simple, and it's really not fleshed out. But Diane, in regard to your struggle with number two, I also was really struggling with it. And it literally just dawned on me while I started the Zoom with everybody that a character in mine who is not the main character or protagonist is Dracula. And when he finds his first daughter, quote unquote, he makes a statement that he's going to take her and show her how to change the rest of the world or like something like that. And I think it kind of answered that question for me, but it really took me a long time to get there. So, although it's very simple and non-specific, for me, it kind of helped with that question. And Diane, I don't know if that's helpful for you, but I just thought I would share.
Thank you. That's great. Has anybody read the Outlander books by any chance? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, so these are really epic long books, historical fiction, where a woman from the 20th century falls through the stones and goes back in time to the 18th century. And the theme in the first book is that she's trying to get back to the 20th century. That's just the theme. And so much of, there's a lot of foreshadowing, there's a lot of those statements early on where everything that happens, all the conflict that arises to get in her way, prevents her from getting back to the stones to get back to the 20th century. She eventually falls in love with someone that she meets in the 18th, and then she's trying to get back to him. She's trying to decide, stay or go, and then trying to be with him the whole time. So there's there's a destination, and everything ties into that. So trying to get back is sort of the theme, which you see early on, and it just follows all the way through. Even though the goal shifts a little, she's always trying to get back to something. So that could be one example. Any other questions? Any other check? Yeah, Susan. No, go ahead.
I was just with your description of Outlander, I thought that was really smart too, just because well, I don't know necessarily, but I wonder if it could be helpful in the title of the story as well, because you kind of get an idea of what it'll be about as well. Maybe that could be some element of like letting the reader know what they're about to dive into.
It could be. It's interesting. Titles are super hard, and in different countries, there are different trends and sort of approaches to it. Same thing with book covers, which is a whole other conversation. But yes, some titles you can definitely tell what that theme is. Others, maybe not. I mean, the working title I have for my next novel is called Becoming Batya. And it's one woman's journey to figuring out who she is, and she literally will look to change her name at some point. And so, I mean, I don't know if that tells it or not, but you could play with that, and that could be a way that you remind yourself of the theme too. Yeah. Anybody else want to check in about how it's gone for you in the last week? Struggles you've had, successes you've had, anything that you'd like to ask or share since our last call? Patrice.
Hi, everybody. I just find that I have to rethink my whole story idea, the one that I pitched to everyone last week, because I keep coming back to the so what. That's my
Okay.
question, like, so what?
Yeah.
And I appreciate, Lynn, that you raised that question sort of in a different way, though, last week, because it made me think, and I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't the right thing. So I've got another idea that I'm going to cook up and use the beat sheets for, but yeah.
Well, it's amazing that you have two great ideas, but let's stop for a second with your original idea. Don't be so quick to throw it out, because if you really love the story idea, let's find the so what. It is findable. There could be something there. So do you want to talk through why you think it may not have legs yet?
Not yet. Not out of embarrassment or shyness. It's just I don't really know what to discuss yet. So
Okay. All right. Cool.
thanks.
No problem. Yeah, sure. Martina, what did you say?
It's just
Yeah, I see in the chat. So, okay, so that's a quote from Eat, Pray, Love, which was a book before it was a
right.
movie.
I'm not sure if it's the
Um,
same quote in the book though. That's why I
yeah,
said it's from the movie.
yeah. Yeah, I mean it's Elizabeth Gilbert's story, and it was all about, trying to find herself, trying to find life in her life. And so that was her theme as she goes through Italy, India, Indonesia, and all the things
Even
that
though
happen.
in the film it was not another character saying the theme,
Right.
it was her, but it was still talking to a friend, figuring out what's next.
Yeah.
What's my next chapter?
Yep, absolutely. It's a great example. Thank you, Martina. Anybody else? You want to share anything, ask a question? Okay. All right, so this week we're going to work on some more beats, but we're also going to talk about two really important aspects of planning your story and then, of course, writing your story. So I'm going to share some slides at this point. And I'm sorry, it always takes me a minute to figure out what I'm doing. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is transformation, which you have to have in some way. So either, as we said last week, it's a character who transforms from one state to another by the end, or it's the reader, like you're imparting some concepts where the reader starts to think about things differently and um, is changed by the end of the book. It really is like, oh, that's a new perspective. Or it could be both. It really could be that the transformation happens both within the book and outside of it, the impact that it has. But either way, you have to have some kind of transformation. There has to be a change at some point from beginning to end. And so it's an important thing to think about within your own project that you're working on. Is it a character? Is it the world of the book? Is it a perspective? Is it the reader, or is it within the story? And so knowing that transformation can help to inform and inspire scenes that you build, actions that are taken, conflicts between characters, some of the dialogue, both internal and external. All of those things are really important. And so I want you to think about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about it, and then we're going to go on to one more element that is really important when you're planning. But readers are curious about who this character is when they first meet them, and then who they're going to become. And they have to care about their change. They have to want to root them on, to advocate for them. And usually the change is for the better, but you can change from good to bad. You could change from bad to worse. That is something that is possible. There's no absolute when it comes to writing fiction. But literally the word transformation means change of shape. So every story has a shape, and it's going to metamorphose by the end. It might be you might have a series of transformations, but just think about that change of shape, significant change from start to end. Okay, like I said, it's usually a change from whoever they are, and it's an improvement to the better. So we're going to see them make choices, think about things, try to really decide who they want to be and how they want to go and why. That why is really important. But you could play around with a character who goes downhill. It could be really upsetting to read that, but there could be something redemptive at the end, maybe, or maybe that's just a very real story that you want to tell. This happens with Roger and Lord of the Flies. It happens with Anakin Skywalker and Star Wars. There's a devolution into villainry. We want it to stop, but also there's a part of us, like, I always like stories where in some way I'm rooting for the bad guy, and in some way I don't like the good guy. Like, there are really great stories show you the good and the bad of all characters. And when you both root and loathe both of them, that is really great storytelling. It's not easy, but it's great storytelling. If you think about a book where, or a story where a character doesn't change, like for example, Indiana Jones, he doesn't change. There are things in society that change in the Indiana Jones story from start to finish. But he as a character doesn't. He's just the same all the way through. And there are lots of stories like that. It's just that either people around that character are changing or the world itself. And so there's something that happens, right? Another good example is Anne of Green Gables. Anne's out of step with everybody, doesn't fit in, and everybody's trying to get her to conform. I mean, a lot of us can relate to that, I certainly can. But, at the end, they realize they should actually be a little bit more like her, right? So there's maybe some mutual transformation and mutual resistance as well. If you think about like Forrest Gump, for example, he doesn't really change, but the world sure does change a lot around him. And the way he is and his consistency helps others to change, like Jenny, his friend and, love of his life and all of that. If you've seen Forrest Gump, if you haven't, you should. It's really, really remarkable. Any questions about transformation? And as I'm talking, think about how this applies to your book and what transformation. We're going to do some writing on this in a minute, but let's also talk about conflict, crisis, and resolution. So this is sort of the engine of your book. There's some kind of conflict, and we see it in the first third. It comes to a head, which is the crisis. That's by about 2/3 through, and then the ending is how it resolves. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. So there's two kinds of conflict. It's internal or it's external. So there's some kind of conflict in the world or between people, or it's within a character. It might be both. That's a lot to write, but it could very well be. And the idea is that there has to be some kind of conflict to deal with and to overcome or to try to overcome. They may not. Otherwise, the story will be a little bit flat. And so when you decide what your conflict is, that's going to help to sort of move the story forward. If you think about, what conflict is in fiction, what's its purpose? What does it look like in a scene? Anybody have any ideas about how that plays out? Something that you've read that provides a great example of conflict moving the story forward, or the purpose of a conflict in a book, in a story? Anybody have an example that comes to mind?
Well, yeah, last week, one night, I subscribe to digital theater, so you can see a lot of Shakespeare plays and stuff like that. And I watched Othello, which is one of my favorite plays. But that conflict of, his sergeant being so jealous of Othello's success, and everything he does to pull Othello down, is that conflict, developing to it.
Yep, that's great. Thank you. Anybody watch House of Dragons, the Game of Thrones spinoff? Yeah, okay. Culminating episode of this season last night, which was amazing. But there's lots of things we could talk about, and I wish I have not yet read the Game of Thrones books. I have one of them, the first one, sitting on my counter. I'm a little nervous to get into it because I just loved the show. But in House of Dragons, I would say there's obviously external conflicts over power, who's going to rule, the kingdoms and everything. But I also think there's an internal conflict, and those are very complicated stories. So, those are hard to write. But there's an internal conflict with Alicent, who is the queen. Is it the green flag? I think she is. Anyway, and I'm not going to spoil anything for anybody, but she definitely has sort of a pondering and a reckoning of her own that helps move the story along too. And you see how that plays out through the relationships and through the various situations that arise. But you can have both. It's just how much do you want to bite off and work with. Heidi, what's your question?
Oh, I was just gonna comment on, like, I think, because I mostly come from a creative nonfiction background, and but I was thinking about Wild because almost everybody is seeing the movie, and you have both an internal and external conflict. I mean, the internal conflict is she's lost her mother and is really hasn't been able to piece her life together,
Mhm.
and then externally she's walking this trail that she's not really prepared for, and then
Mhm.
like it starts, you get a glimpse of the sort of the metaphor for this conflict that actually happens right at the beginning, where one of her boots gets lost on the trail, and then she has to make do with her shoes with these camp sandals until she gets to the nearest place and solves this problem. So there's this loss of a mother, there's a loss of a boot,
Mhm.
and sort of resolving all of that and getting to herself to this trail sort of moves her through that internal conflict of losing her mother.
And it's interesting because how would would that story have worked if the hike had been easy?
No, I don't think so. I think, but yeah, we need the battle of those conflicts. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The sort of like, can I do this? Can I make it? It's such a perfect parallel to the grief journey too.
Is
Yeah, go ahead.
is it so she does start with like the beginning has a little glimpse of that boot loss scene. And I
Hmm.
was thinking about doing something similar with my book.
Yeah.
And this was, I was kept thinking about this, if I take some little piece from, this sort of crisis moment and put it at the front of the book, just
Yeah.
a glimpse, is that cheating, and is that considered part of the first beat, or is it just a thing that's there?
I don't think there's anything called cheating unless you're taking somebody else's writing and saying it's yours. But I think that I think honestly, like it's hard enough to write a book. Why not make it easier for you? Sure, put it at the beginning and then get back to it later. A little bit of foreshadowing never hurts anybody. It really helps. And then the reader, I always like when I read like murder mysteries, I'm like, okay, I try to figure out who it is because they literally plant clues. Like I can't think of a better genre to discuss plotting because if you don't know who was the murderer, you can't, create shadows of doubt all along the way. And there are so many times that I think it's that one, but it actually wasn't him, or I think it was her and it wasn't her, because the author sets it up to have these false flags of like, oh, now I figured it out. Nope, story's still going. I was wrong. And I think that's to me a great argument for planning because you just don't know how to give those little Easter eggs all along the way unless you know where you're headed. So put the boot in. Absolutely. Yeah, the metaphorical boot. I love it. Okay, just a few more things about conflict, and we're going to do a little bit of writing about it as far as it goes to yours, and then we'll do the beats sort of in the last half hour. But conflict keeps your story moving, just like in life. Like if everything is hunky dory, it's a little boring. And so we're always moving towards something. We're trying to save money or fall in love or buy a house or I don't know, get to let the heat break and it's fall and I don't know. It can be specific, it can be vague, it could be a big dream of the heart, it could be I just need enough food in the fridge. Like those are conflicts as well. Um, but you need forward momentum in your story. And that is a need that keeps humans moving in general. And it's either created by conflict or a threat of conflict. So the fear that something is going to happen is equally impactful. And so you want to think about, is there real conflict happening or is there anxiety or fear about it or, sort of like the game in the head. You know what I'm saying? Um, the crisis, so we have conflict, crisis, resolution as like big picture items. The crisis is when that conflict comes to a head. It gets as bad as it's going to get. And it's a turning point, a never turning back type of moment. Um, you can write a novel without a really central conflict, but then it's a totally character driven novel, and there still needs to be some kind of internal struggle of some sort that leads to a transformation. Then there's an internal journey of the character, and there's going to be stakes of some sort. There's going to be, what happens if I don't do this? What happens if I go in that direction? So character-driven novels are usually a little more literary, whereas, conflict action-driven novels are more plot-based, more contemporary, more mainstream. Both are really valid. It's just that there has to be some change. There has to be a sea shift. And it depends on, which one, how you want to take it. It can go in a lot of directions. And you just have to decide which one you're willing to dig into and stick with, because it is a commitment to write a novel. And I think that's part of why we saw those statistics last week, and the number of people that actually complete a first draft is very small, because this is a big commitment, you guys. And again, no one's holding a gun to your head. You do not need to write a novel. But if you want to, you have to stick with it until you get to the end, just for your own accomplishment, for no other reason. If you want to, this is a goal you set, for yourself.
Can I ask a question here?
Of course.
I mean, in real life, people can have all kinds of conflicts and lead to all kinds of blow-ups in their life, and they don't learn a damn thing from it. They don't transform at all. It seems go on to the next conflict, or else just live out their life. I mean, but you can't do that in a novel. You've got to kind of manufacture something.
Well, yes, and also I would argue that they don't learn anything. Like, it seems on the outside, like maybe they don't change, like it's really hard for people to change, but you never know what's going through their head. Like I have some pretty stubborn people in my family, and I would say, gosh, they never learn anything. But I'm sure I know a character or two in my family who probably think about it, even if they don't let the public know. You know what I mean?
But that's hard to, now I'm coming back to what I've been working on. That's hard to convey. I mean, that there may not be an outward change. They just might feel worse about things, or bury them, or start to sublimate, or stuff like that. But that's hard to show in a novel.
Well, that's why in the novel you have the benefit of internal dialogue and interiority that we don't get in real life. I can't get into a family member's head ever, but I can in a book, and I can have a solitary scene of a character who, goes off on a hike and is wrestling with herself, but I may not know if a real person in my life does that. So I think we have more freedoms on the page than we do in real life. But you're right that a book where the person doesn't learn anything and doesn't ever change is kind of boring, right?
Yeah, I guess that maybe I'm thinking that, well, yeah, that would be, I mean, yeah, you can't end it there. I mean,
Well, because why is the reader going to care? Why is the reader spending their time? Let's think about it this way, guys. You're all readers, I'm assuming. What do you want from an experience of reading a book? Anybody?
Well, I want to be absorbed in their story.
Okay. And what makes you absorbed in a story?
Well, when I think about the stories that I like most, they're really not a lot about things that I've confronted for the most part, but they certainly are. Well, one thing that does get me absorbed, and where I do feel in my own life, is feeling like a fish out of water.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And how that plays out in somebody's life.
Sure.
Will keep me absorbed.
Right. So there's an element of escape and curiosity when you're absorbed in a story. Anybody else have any other insights about what you look for when you're reading? Yeah, Haley?
I feel like I'm always looking for that kind of save the cat structure. So I feel really satisfied if I can identify what the writer is trying to do. And I don't know if that's enough of a reader's perspective, but recently I read The Fourth Wing, and I was like, oh, I could see the save the cat beats so clearly. And that was I feel like that just kind of opened things up for me as like making connections for like how it's supposed to transition. And I don't know, I thought that part was well done, and I like that plot structure and movement.
Okay, awesome. Anybody else? What you look for when you're reading?
I like a character I can root for.
Uh-huh. Yep. So somebody that you're hoping that they succeed, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else?
I like the stories that make you laugh out loud.
Uh-huh.
And in the one series that I am pretty stuck to reading by Jana DeLeon is the character starts out very work driven, work oriented, and she happens to be a professional assassin.
Okay.
And the comedy comes in because she's from Washington, D.C., and because she has she's got a price on her head. She's sent to a small town in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have any relatives from small town South,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically just her acclimating and trying to blend in.
Okay. I think that what we're talking about, you guys, what I'm hearing is that there are certain um, essential themes that come up again and again in what it sounds like a lot of books that we like, which are maybe, championing your character, their success or transformation or happiness or whatever it is, some escape to add levity to our lives or entertainment or something. But I think a lot of people are rooting for someone who feels like they don't belong to find acceptance, which is a universal thing that we can all relate to. A lot of writers feel very introverted and we're isolated in a lot of ways, and so we might feel awkward in social settings, and then you see a character who thrives in it and you're like, oh, that's cool because maybe I don't, or whatever it is. A lot of us feel like we don't necessarily fit, and so when we read a book where somebody finds someone who loves them or accepts them for who they are, it feels redemptive to us too. And so there's certain themes that come back again and again in the books that we read. And so I want you to keep that in mind when we move on to this part, which is answering these questions. And is this big enough, or should I make it larger for you guys to see?
Larger.
Yeah, I'm gonna zoom in. Let's see if we can do that. Can I? Okay, well, what if we do this? Is that better?
Yep.
Okay, so there are 5 questions here, and I invite you to spend some time on them, which I think will help you with the beats. And so it's 42 after. So I'd like to give you, how would 15 minutes be to work on this? Does that sound like a good amount of time? Yeah? Okay, so we're gonna, in fact, I'll check in with you at 10 minutes and see how it's going. So let's do that. 3:42 my time. So at 3:52, we'll see if we need another 5 minutes. Okay? Let's give it a shot. Okay, just checking in to see if you guys would benefit from 5 more minutes or you're ready to come back. Okay, we got 5 more. Alrighty, let's come on back. Oops. All right, so how did that go? What challenges, what revelations? Anybody want to share?
I will. That went outstandingly well. So well, I am ready to go and have a drink and celebrate.
I love it.
I think that one of the reasons is all of the work that I did over the past week, where I didn't really feel it was going to come together, but I think it did come together. I could go through, I mean, I really raced through each of those and I'm really satisfied with
Great.
what I have down. The
Okay.
only issue that I have is one that I was struggling with anyway, which is I thought this story was going to be from one point of view. That's how I've thought about it for literally a couple of months.
Uh-huh.
And as I worked on it last week, it seemed like another person was becoming the real protagonist, which really bothered me. And then
Wow.
I thought I would have two protagonists, which is kind of tricky. But now going through this, it really is back to that person that really started to emerge as the protagonist over the last week. And I'm wondering if I have to throw out my other protagonist, which I don't want to really do, but unless I switch point of view, I mean, I guess I could do that, but it gets to a bigger issue of how do you easily get in backstory. Well, not easily, that's a dumb word to use, but how do you get in the backstory? Well, that's sort of an unanswerable question, I guess, but that's where I'm sitting now. I mean, how I'm going to deal with the backstory. And also, I think the little protagonist that got thrown out, this has probably had a great effect on her life. And, but she's just, going to be, that's too bad, because I feel like that's really more important for the meaning of civilization.
Sure. Well, there you go. I mean, I think sometimes we do have to kill our babies, which is really hard to do. But when you have one vision of how it was going to go, and it becomes apparent that it's going to be stronger going in another direction, you have to give yourself the permission to be flexible and also remember nothing is set in stone. So if you try this new protagonist and it really, really bothers you, you're the boss. You get to go back and change to a different protagonist. But you might be pleasantly surprised and say, oh, I'm glad I stumbled on this. It's much better. So just being open with curiosity, I think, is the best way to go forward. Yeah. And also to ask yourself why it bothers you so much that it's not the original protagonist, like what, and that could be really interesting to uncover. Well, what is it? Like why did you have your heart set on that? Is there something else you can bring into the story that satisfies that in a different way?
Well, I think that it's easy to answer because the origin was an essay I wrote that was nonfiction.
Okay.
Where obviously I was the driver of that, and so I assumed I'd be the driver here too. But as I worked on it over the week, it didn't work that way. The real story had to come from somebody else because they're the ones that really did the actions that had such a terrible effect, know.
I mean, I think it might be easier for you to write when it's not you, like a fictionalized you as the protagonist too. Because then you can really stand back and have a 360-degree view and not take it personally. Yeah. Thank you so much, Diane. I'm glad it was a success for you. Who else wants to share how it went for you?
I can.
Great.
I was rolling right along until I got to the fifth one.
Okay.
And then I realized, I have scenes like for that middle, right, that happen along the way, but maybe not enough conflict. So I really had to stretch for that one. And I'm going to have to do some thinking about that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that this can be eye-opening, and then it helps to make the planning easier once we realize, and it's very common. So many writers, when they're writing a story, they think they've thought it all through, and it's just impossible to think it all through, and that's why we do the planning. So great that you hit on this now, and then you don't have some editor down the road saying, well, but there needs to be more conflict, and you're like, damn it, I already wrote this amazing story. You're going to hand them something that they're very happy with. So that's great. Awesome. Who else? Anybody else want to share how it went? Or share part of, yes, Haley and then Martina?
I think was really helpful in kind of pushing me in a direction. I feel like I'm bouncing between like two novel ideas, and I think what you were saying before really resonated, that the reason sometimes people don't finish is that it's like a commitment. So I'm just trying to, I don't know if you have any insight on this, if you think it's a good idea, but I'm trying to get down like the ideas of both, just so that I don't feel as torn, like it can be on the back burner somewhere while I work on one.
Well, I have a document that I save with all of my ideas for books I want to write so that I don't forget them, and put down as many ideas, as many specifics as I have for each idea so that I can go back to it when I finish this one. Like I already have the fourth novel in my head that I want to write, and I'm still just writing the third. And so like I'm chomping at the bit to get to that fourth one, but I really want to finish the third. So I'm excited that I have a project after this one that I can't wait to go to, but you can only write one novel at a time. I know somebody who's writing two, and she's very like stuck between them because it's hard to write two. So they're both pretty choppy. I always, my mom says if it were easy, everyone would do it, and that's so true. This is not easy stuff, but it's ambitious, and wanting to write a novel and having the story idea is evidence that you have what it takes to get there if you want to. So I do think it's important to go back through and say, why am I writing this novel? Why do I want to write this novel? And have a really compelling reason. Because if you don't, then you might get to 20,000 words and say, I'm bored, I'm not interested, I'm moving on to something else. There's nothing wrong with that. There's plenty of book projects that don't ever go anywhere. And maybe they were just hand warmers, warming up your hand to write the real thing. So I think jot down what all you know about the next idea, and then put it aside, work on this one. If it bores you, go to the next one. Yeah.
Do you have any other like clues intrinsically, besides like if it's boring, that it's like the right project to pursue?
I mean, I think asking yourself why you want to write this novel is really important. And if it's because you think it'll sell, or you think that the market needs it, or any reason that has to do with pleasing other people, it may not be a good novel for you to write. If it's because you're very passionate about this story, you're in love with these characters, you want to see where they go, you just want to spend time with them, you are really lit up by writing it, then I think it's worth writing.
Can I just ask one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
Like, do you think that writing one that you would find easier to write is a valid reason? Like one I find more interesting but one seems like I could do it.
Yeah, why not? I mean,
Okay.
That's a great reason, but also I hope there's some passion for the topic too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Martina.
Yeah, I thought this was really helpful. I realized that I need to up the stakes, which is my typical problem.
Okay.
Stakes are not high enough yet, but I'm working on it.
I
The
can relate.
writing is all down. I always, when I handwrite things, they're clearer than when I type them.
Yes. Well, there's psychological research for that. You actually activate a creative center in your brain when you're writing by hand that does not get activated when you're typing. And so while it slows us down, and we have, I'm impatient, I like to type, I can type fast, I get my best work when I write by hand, for sure. Cool. Anybody else want to share how it went for them? Yes, no, maybe? Okay.
I can.
Go ahead. Yes.
I thought it was a really helpful exercise, but I got really hung up on the main conflict in my novel.
Okay.
And I feel like I have too much going on.
So tell me about it. Tell me about the main conflict.
Well, it's about a woman who has she's been kind of gaslit. She is I can read my log line. Oh, I'm sorry. It's about an amnesiac woman who is called home when her father is in a car accident, and she doesn't she knows she fell off a cliff her last summer at the lake, and she doesn't have a memory of that summer, but assumes she's been told or gaslit that nothing happened. And while she's there, things start to she starts investigating this mystery, and there's a lot of internal stuff going on where she's an unreliable narrator. So she's trying to figure out, she's afraid she might be crazy, like the whole town thinks she is. But at the same time, she's very strongly driven to follow her instincts and solve this mystery. So I know how it ends. I know the crisis, but when it comes to like really like kind of beating it out, which is why I'm trying to start broad.
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible and then kind of organically let it get more complicated. Because I love Girl on a Train and Gone Girl. And so it's kind of in that kind of family.
Okay. So what's the transformation in this story?
Well, the transformation is she's been, gaslit to believe that, basically nothing happened and it was an accident. And she comes to find out that, she had a relationship with a local boy that her parents didn't approve of. And, there was a lot involved where the parents orchestrated they tried to end the relationship, and they were successful, but the boy disappeared. And so there's a murder and nobody knows what happened to this kid. And so basically she solves the murder. And
does her memory come back to her?
Yes, I'm sorry. So she fully recovers her memory, and then she sees herself as the pawn in this, multiple layers of being gaslit, and then she's able to save herself. So she transforms from being a victim to somebody who's able to actually protect another woman and solve the mystery, and sees her parents' role. And so she goes from one extreme to the other, becomes fully aware.
Okay.
And
the transformation is from amnesiac to remembering, weak victim to strong advocate. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I do think sounds like there's a lot in that story, and that doesn't mean it's not possible, but the more specific you can get when you're planning, the easier it's going to be to write. So I wouldn't start broad. I would start as specific as you can get, because it might be hard to do, but it will make the writing much easier for you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, the more specific you can get, the more it's writable and relatable too.
Okay.
Does that help, Christine?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think I meant that. I said it in reverse.
Okay.
I'm gonna write it down anyway, because I get very overwhelmed very quickly. So
no worries.
Keep the storyline simple, and then let it get more complicated if I can handle it. Yeah.
If it needs to, maybe it doesn't need to.
That's true.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you to everybody. That was not what I wanted to do. Okay. Now I want to give you a few minutes to try to make some progress with the beats. And there's two things that are going to be homework this week. One is to do the next 5 beats, which is a lot. I understand. It's a 4-week class, so that's why we're going to move fast. So being as detailed as you can into the next 5 beats. So that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, those are the ones you want to do. I also want to invite you to begin engaging with your characters, at the very least, to think about who they are. Maybe you're just jotting down some details about them, their backstory, their motivations. This is all preparation for next week, where we're going to really delve into character. And I do advocate not only doing a beat sheet when you're planning, but doing a deep, detailed character sketch on all the characters that you know are going to be in the book. Some others might introduce themselves to you and you start writing, and some of the ones you envision now may not be that interesting down the line, but just to start with that, so that you can keep track of who has blue eyes and who has brown hair and who's tall and who's not. And it's really easy to lose track of those things. So it's about 10 minutes after the hour. And what I'd like to do is give you 10 minutes to start working on either of those. And then we'll come back together to wrap up and ask any final questions. Okay?
Can you repeat that second one, please?
Yes, starting to think about your characters. So you're just jotting down notes about who they are, their backstory, their motivations, you know, any little physical characteristics or, you know, picks or habits that will make them interesting, just because you want to start laying the groundwork for character sketches that we'll work on next week too. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to work on one or the other, and then we'll come back. Okay? So 22 after, we'll come back. All righty, let's come on back. Hopefully you're in a flow, and I'm sorry to interrupt it, but we just have a few minutes left today. And so I want to give you time to ask additional questions, anything at all, as we're at the halfway point in this very quick course. So anybody have additional questions or anything while we have this chance? About the beats, about writing, about your story, about characters, about anything novel related whatsoever. Yes, Haley.
I'm just curious if like I think maybe you went over this last class, but in terms of word count for like each beat, like how fleshed out?
I mean, I tend to have a few paragraphs for each beat.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it should be more than just a couple sentences, but I don't think you want a whole page for each beat. So a
Okay.
few paragraphs, yeah.
Because I get a little like stumbled with when it says like a couple scenes or something like that.
So like I'll do like for the very final one, which one is it? I think it's beat 14 where I either 14 or 15 where I have like bullet points for each of the things that it's asking me. And then it'll be like different scenes. Like sometimes I'll have in a paragraph like several things happening, which clearly are going to be more than one scene because there's different progressions of things that happen. So I just happen to know that. But I think that you could, when you envision a scene as like one interaction, one thing happens, one movement forward, you could do that. You could do it as bullet points so that you know, and that's helpful for you for when you go to write. Or you could, it could be all woven in sentences in the paragraphs, and you just sort of take that as a guide to help you start writing. So I don't know if
Okay.
that helps.
Yeah, that does. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anyone? So I also want to just say, and we're not really going to spend time on publishing paths in this course, but you can always ask questions. I think it's important not to think about how you want to publish when you're writing, because that can definitely thwart your creativity. And there's a whole process to getting a book published. There's a lot of different paths, but it's more of the business side of the brain that can really freeze up the creative juices. And so for your purposes in this course, I would say focus on the writing, on getting the story out, and then you have things to work with. Then you have options. Yeah. If you have questions about publishing paths, I'm happy to answer them most likely in week 4, but definitely I can be a resource to you, but try not to let that overshadow what you're doing with the writing. Get your beautiful stories out on paper. Anybody else? Last chances for questions, comments, anything. All right, cool. Well, a lot of you were great with the
I have a
WhatsApp
quick
group.
question,
Oh
sorry.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
It's not necessarily in regards to the outline, but once we start writing, is there a rule of thumb how many chapters per plot point?
Not really. I mean, some books have very, very long chapters, some have quite short chapters, and it's like rapidly moving. So I think it's, you know, in my novel that's coming out at the end of August, I have chapters that have different scenes in the chapter, because I go back and forth between perspectives. And so, you know, it might be his perspective here and her perspective there, and it's all one chapter. Some people would break those up into individual chapters. So I think it's personal preference.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right. So what I was
Thank
gonna
you.
say, yes, you're welcome. If you guys can check in the WhatsApp, questions as well as progress. We all want to cheer each other on. Okay. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.